Thousands of people have been declared clinically dead, and most of them come back with nothing. No memories, no visions, no answers. But the three people you're about to hear about came back with something. Something they should never have known. A woman who appeared in a photograph that shouldn't exist. A dead resident waiting inside a building full of the deceased. And a child who seemed to know exactly when someone was about to die. The disturbing part? None of these people believed they would experience anything unusual until it happened to them. The first story begins with a man who officially died for 4 minutes. Not almost died. Not nearly died. Died. At least, that's what the hospital records say. When rescuers pulled him from an icy river, he had no pulse, no breathing, no response. For all practical purposes, he was gone. Doctors eventually restarted his heart. But what he claimed to see during those 4 minutes was so specific that 3 months later, it would be connected to a photograph that should not have existed. Before the accident, he trusted facts, evidence, logic. If something couldn't be proven, he dismissed it. Then one winter afternoon, his car slid across an icy bridge. The guardrail shattered. The vehicle plunged into the freezing river below. Water rushed into the cabin. Darkness swallowed everything. And then, he woke up. Or at least, that's how he described it. He wasn't underwater. He wasn't in a hospital. He was standing beside a road that stretched endlessly into darkness. No trees, no buildings, no sky. Just an empty path disappearing into nothing. And far ahead, a single street lamp. The strange thing was that it seemed both distant and close at the same time, as if reality couldn't decide where it belonged. So he started walking. And as he approached the light, he realized someone was standing beneath it. A woman, motionless, waiting. At first, he thought it was his mother. Then he remembered. His mother was still alive. Yet somehow he felt certain he knew this woman. The closer he got, the more uneasy he became. Not because she looked dangerous, because she looked familiar, like someone he had forgotten, someone important. Then the woman slowly raised her hand and pointed behind him. He turned. For the first time, he noticed another road, a darker road, a narrower road. The instant he looked at it, a feeling crashed over him. Not fear, certainty. The certainty that if he stepped onto that path, he would never return. Ever. When he looked back toward the woman, everything was gone. The road, the lamp, the darkness, all of it. And he woke up in intensive care. Alive. For 3 months, he convinced himself it had been a hallucination, a dying brain creating comforting images. Then one evening, his mother called. Before she explained why, he felt a knot form in his stomach. She had discovered something in the attic, something she couldn't explain. The next day, she handed him a faded photograph. And the moment he saw it, his blood ran cold. Standing in the center of the picture was the woman from beneath the street lamp. The exact face. The exact expression. The exact woman. His mother explained that the woman was a relative who had died in childhood generations earlier, long before anyone in the family supposedly owned a camera. Meaning, there should have been no photograph. None. Yet somehow it existed. And nobody could explain why. The first man returned from death with a question. The second came back with a witness. And unlike the first story, this witness had been dead for decades. A young security guard worked nights inside a nearly empty apartment tower. Most evenings were uneventful, silent, routine, until the night of the fire. Smoke began spreading through the upper floors. Residents were trapped. Without hesitation, the guard ran inside, again and again and again, each trip bringing another resident to safety, until suddenly he vanished. Firefighters eventually found him unconscious near a stairwell. No pulse, no breathing, barely alive. He survived. But what he described afterward unsettled everyone who heard it. He said he woke up inside the building's lobby, only it wasn't empty anymore. Every chair was occupied, every couch, every corner. Hundreds of people sat silently throughout the room, waiting. None appeared frightened. None appeared injured. They simply sat there as though they were waiting for something to begin. Then he noticed a woman near the elevator. She looked familiar. Then an elderly couple by the window. Then a child sitting near the stairs. Suddenly, he understood why. He had seen all of them before. Not in person, in photographs. Old photographs stored in the building archives. Tenant records. Historical files. Every face belonged to someone who had once lived there. Every face belonged to someone who was dead. An elderly man finally stood, walked toward him, smiled, and asked one question. "Why are you here so early?" The guard couldn't answer. The old man glanced toward the lobby doors, then said, "Your shift isn't finished." Everything vanished, and he woke up. Weeks later, unable to let it go, he searched through old records. Hours passed. Then he found a photograph taken when the building first opened decades earlier. Standing in the front row was the same elderly man. The exact face, the exact smile. The guard eventually quit, not because he was afraid, but because, in his own words, "I stopped believing death was an ending, and that scared me more." Our final story is the most unsettling, because nobody knows whether the experience happened before death or because of it. An elderly schoolteacher lived alone, healthy, independent, sharp-minded. Then one night she failed to answer her phone. The next morning, neighbors found her unconscious inside her home. She survived. But during recovery, she described something impossible. She said she woke shortly after midnight to 3 slow knocks at her front door. 3 deliberate knocks. Nothing more. She walked through the dark house, reached the door, and opened it. A young boy stood outside, maybe 8 years old, wearing clothes that looked decades out of date. But the strange thing wasn't the boy. It was what stood behind him. Because her home sat at the end of a dirt road. Yet beyond him stretched a fog-covered city avenue. Streetlights, buildings, traffic signals, an entire city that shouldn't have been there. The boy smiled and asked, "Are you coming?" She asked where. The boy looked confused, as if the answer was obvious. Then he pointed into the fog and quietly said, "Home." Something about that single word terrified her, not because it sounded threatening, because it sounded true. She backed away, closed the door, locked it, returned to bed, and remembered nothing else until waking in a hospital. Months later, she shared the story at a community gathering. Most people dismissed it, until an elderly man listening nearby suddenly froze. His expression changed. Then he asked a question that made her heart stop. "When you opened the door, was he carrying a silver whistle?" Her face turned pale. Because he was. The elderly man explained that his grandfather had told him an old local legend, a story dating back more than a century. According to the legend, people nearing death sometimes reported seeing the same boy, always smiling, always waiting near a doorway, always asking the same question. Are you coming? Nobody knew where the story originated, and nobody knew who the boy was. But the teacher never forgot the feeling she experienced that night. Not fear, not panic, not confusion, recognition. As though some forgotten part of her already knew him, and already knew where he wanted her to go. So what do you think? Were these experiences nothing more than dreams created by dying minds? The final sparks of consciousness struggling to survive? Or did these people briefly glimpse something hidden beyond reality? Something waiting just beyond the edge of life itself? Whatever the answer is, one thing remains certain. Every person in tonight's stories came back alive, but none of them returned the same. And maybe that's the most frightening part. Because if these people really saw something waiting beyond death, then the question isn't whether it exists. The question is why so many people describe seeing the same things, and whether one day, when the room goes quiet and someone knocks at the door, you'll recognize them too.